Do you know if you're struggling to get hold of greenery, if you can't forage for anything and you don't have a local florist that sells greenery, you can always buy houseplants to create a fantastic floral design. Welcome back to today's video. Now, you might not be as fortunate as I am to be able to get hold of greenery from your local area, whether it's your garden or whether it's foraging or whether it's purchasing it from a florist shop. But you might not realise that houseplant foliage will work just as well in a floral design. And in today's video, I'm going to be using this Boston fern or this Nephrolepis fern to add some texture and some variation in shape and form to my floral design. Now, I've used quite a lot of the greenery off this plant. Eventually, it will fill back out again as more growth appears. But I thought it would be a good lesson for you to show you how you can just cut off the greenery and use it in a floral design. Now, if you're picking it from a house plant, then you can use it straight away. You can pick it without conditioning it. But if you're picking foliage from the garden, it's really important that you condition it properly because you're taking it out of the heat of the garden. Incidentally, if you've got houseplants in your conservatory where it's very warm, then I would cut them, put them in water for a few hours just to revive a little bit before placing them in foam. But this one is well watered, it's well cared for. The studio today is quite cool, so I'm going to cut it directly from the plant. And the main reason for me choosing the fern type greenery is because it's going to give me a really nice contrast in texture between a forage greenery. So this is beech, and if you're in the UK, you will recognise beech, whether it's the green coloured or the copper beech that we tend to use more of in the autumn. This has been foraged for and I've had it in water for 2 or 3 days, and I've used the correct conditioning method. So if you're not familiar with conditioning, you need to prepare your flowers and process them using different techniques. And I do have an ultimate guide for care and conditioning of flowers and foliage that you can purchase by following the link in the description box below. So the reason for choosing the fern is that it's a fantastic contrast. This is very glossy and dark green, and it has a circular leaf, and it's going to contrast really nicely against the fern. And I've also picked something called a Tamarisk. This has come from my own garden, and this is much more lightweight and more fern-like looking. So that is also going to give me a nice contrast. So rather than all the greeneries fighting for attention and being very similar in their appearance, they're going to really stand out alongside one another and give lots of interest. Now, all the flowers that I've got for today's video have come from my garden. I've got some sunflowers, cosmos, and I'm going to go with an arrangement that is quite tall and thin, I think. That's what I'm visualising in my head. So what I'm going to start initially by doing is creating some height. Now, I'm using floral foam today and a container that you might have seen me use before. For some reason, I've got a random hole in this piece of foam, but we'll have to ignore that and work around it. And I'm thinking nice and tall and thin. A little bit shorter maybe. But I've got some beautiful sunflowers that are in the garden, and they're at their prime, so I thought I'd cut them now and bring them in so you can see them before they go past their best. And what I'm going to do really is to create that outline shape with the different types of greenery that I've got. Now, the beech is going to work really nicely to create the heights, and then I'm going to use the Tamarisk over to one side because this one has a nice soft bit of movement on it, and I think this is going to look really nice on the edge. It's just going to cascade over the edge of my container. I don't want to go too wide. I want to create something that's a bit slimline and something that will be in keeping with the size of the sunflowers that I've got. So nice tall arrangement. That's going to balance off the heavy base because it's visually quite heavy on the bottom, so we want a bit of height to counterbalance the visual weight on the bottom. And I'm just going to use a little bit of greenery off to one side. Now, I'm anticipating that with the choice of flowers that I've got, I'm going to make this arrangement slightly asymmetric, so it's a little bit of an L shape but not a really obvious L. I want to keep it quite narrow. That's my sort of thoughts today. I don't have a huge amount of flowers, and if you haven't got sunflowers in your garden, then you can buy them this time of year from the supermarket or a florist shop, and hopefully you can, and you might be able to recreate this with buying just one bunch of sunflowers and adding them to a couple of flowers that you might have in the garden or something else that's in the supermarket or florist shop. So on the opposite side to where I've created the cluster there on the front, I'm going to bring a little bit more of the Tamarisk. This brings the same texture to the shorter side of the arrangement, but doesn't make it really symmetrical and too matchy. So it's unbalanced, but we still have the same colours and the same textures. And then just sort of in the middle here, I'm going to use some of the ferns. Now I'm going to choose the taller pieces of the fern, 2, maybe 3 pieces. As I mentioned, this is a house plant, but there are lots of ferns, particularly in the UK, that are suitable for arranging with. The bracken that we tend to see in fields and on the side of the roads tends to be good enough to be used late summer and early autumn, where you see the spores on the back of the bracken. It's not very good in the spring where it's new growth, it doesn't survive at all, but you can cut it and use it once the spores have appeared on the back. And that there just gives a little bit of interest towards the back. It's a contrast in texture, so we get something else interesting to look at. And then I'm going to use a few of the shorter pieces clustered together here on one side. And the main reason for me clustering them together is because in nature that's how they would grow. They would grow in a nice little cluster, and I'm really trying to replicate what we maybe would see around us. Now the fern that you buy as a houseplant has a very, very thin stem, so you need to be careful when arranging with it because it does, or it can, snap quite easily when you put it into the foam. But it's a lesson today in remembering that you don't necessarily have to buy fresh foliage every time you create an arrangement. You can buy a houseplant, invest in something that you can look after and care for, and you can cut from it when you want to create some fabulous arrangements. So I finished with the fern. So what I'm going to do here at the front is use a few small pieces of the beech towards the front. And I always think when I'm arranging with forage sort of greenery that I'm really lucky because I live in an area where I have neighbours with lots of plants, I have family with lots of trees and shrubs in their garden, and there's always foliage that I can collect for arranging with. So other than the back and the side of the foam in this area here, my foam is pretty much covered. If we look at it from the camera above, I've just got enough space in this area here to place my flowers. With certain arrangements, I find it much easier to put the greenery in first because it gives you a really clear outline to follow. But if you're creating something that's looser without such a formal look to it, then you can add your flowers in first. Just find a method that really suits you and one that you find easy to work with. Now I have 4 fantastic sunflowers that have come from my garden. I can't quite remember the variety, but I will add it to the screen in front. And if you've seen a previous video that I did a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago where I had a giant sunflower, then these are the same variety. And what I've discovered, or maybe what I've learnt, is that the part of the garden where the sunflowers are much better quality or much better size has far more fertiliser in it than this area here. So that means that I need to add some nutrients to my soil to get my sunflowers next year to grow a little bit larger. But it does mean that I have a smaller sunflower head to work with and I don't have to manage such a heavy big stem of sunflowers, because if you are used to arranging with sunflowers then you will know they are really quite heavy stemmed and they can be a bit awkward to arrange, whereas these ones, which have not had quite so much nutrient, have got really lovely small stems. Now what I'm going to do next might not please some of you traditional arrangers. I have 4 sunflowers, and for those of you that like really traditional arrangements, you will have been told to always arrange in 3s, 5s or 7s. And I've only got 4, but I'm not worrying, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that Fibonacci sequence of numbers, and I'm going to arrange 2 together, and I'm going to arrange 2 lower down towards the base. And I've kept the larger flower for the base, and I'm going to slightly offset them to create more of that L shape. And I know what's going to happen. Those really traditional ones amongst you are going to say, you can't do that, Sharon. You can't have two flowers grouped together. You've got to have odd numbers. I think I'm going to cut that a bit shorter. Well, you can. You can have groups of two. And if you're arranging just for pleasure, I don't think it matters how many flowers you have. This one is causing me trouble. I don't want it in the position like that because it's facing down. And what I really want to do is get it in this position so the head is a little bit more clearer when the arrangement is completely finished. So what I've ended up with is a more modern way of arranging where I have a group of two and a group of two lower down at the base. And those traditional ones out there might not even like my next placement of flowers because I'm going to leave this gap really clear and just add some flowers to the base. And for that, I'm going to use a different type of sunflower. This has actually come from my local flower farm. If I mentioned in the beginning these were all from my garden, then I did tell a little bit of a lie because these are left over from a bucket of flowers that I had from my local flower farm. But what's really lovely about these is I can add them to one side just to strengthen that unbalanced look that I'm trying to create. So it creates a little bit of that L shape. That's an L shape, I think, isn't it? It creates a little bit of L-shaped movement, but without making it really traditional, like the shapes that you might have seen me do here on the channel before. So my next flower is going to be some Cosmos, and this variety is Lemonade, and it's one, again, that I have grown in the garden. And what I'm going to do here is just place them slightly off to one side, so there's a bit of space in amongst all the flowers, and they're not too tightly compact together. And I'm going to offset them on the opposite side to where the darker sunflowers are at the bottom. It'll give me a bit of width to the arrangement. And it's a little bit like how they would grow in the garden. So instead of them being formally spaced apart, I've grouped them together as if they would be growing in the garden in their natural sort of position. I'm also going to add another cluster on that longer side there. These are so pretty at the moment in the garden. Their little heads are nodding about in the wind. And these, fortunately, have had a good amount of fertiliser. They're really flourishing in the garden. And I've grown these in containers, in small little pots, because I really don't have any room in the garden for anything more. But a little cluster behind is going to work really well. And you might be wondering, what am I going to put in this area here where there is still a large piece of foam clearly visible? And I'm going to use some feverfew. This actually, now I did tell a big fat lie in the beginning when I said these were all from my garden, because the feverfew and the darker colour sunflowers have both come from my local flower farm. I just got a bit carried away. So what I'm going to do, I've got a few shorter pieces that were used in a previous floral design. So what I'm going to do is give them a nice clean cut on the bottom and place a little group here in the middle. Really, again, just replicating what you would maybe see in the garden. I don't need to add anything too heavy in there because we have those big sunflowers creating the focal point, and this really fragile looking daisy type flower is going to work so nicely grouped down there in the middle. So those traditional ones amongst you might not like that obvious gap that's between the two groupings of sunflowers, but I'm not going to fill it with a really heavy flower. But what I am going to do is just pop in a little bit of greenery. That's going to help prevent it looking like there's an obvious gap, but still leave the space between the flowers so you can appreciate that look. And then I'm just going to tuck in some greenery at the back to make sure that the floral foam is all completely covered. If you've not arranged with sunflowers before, then the foliage of the sunflower will die really quickly once it's been cut from the ground. So if you are buying them from a florist and they haven't had the foliage removed already, then do that straight away, because it'll help the water go straight to the head of the flower and keep it alive for longer. So I hope you've enjoyed that one. Don't forget, as ever, to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell to be told every time I upload a new video. And stay to the end, because you get to see close-ups of the finished design. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.